You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome, guys. I know a lot of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off like the video, subscribe if you're new, and comment what time it is right now. Let's see who's still awake and who's not alone tonight. Let's begin. Story 1. The House on Glover Street. I was 23 when I moved into the house on Glover Street. If you looked it up, you'd find an old neighborhood in the western end of Hamilton, nothing fancy, but sturdy post-war homes, chain-link fences, yards mostly brown by August. I was just out of college, barely scraping together rent. The place was cheap, and that's all I cared about. Getting out on my own mattered more than the little things. A home to crash in, bills paid somehow, and what felt like freedom. The house was 2 stories, brick-faced but worn, with a porch sagging just slightly under the weight of years. The windows were tall, some cracked or fogged with age. The front door creaked with a welcome that felt more like a warning. I remember standing there with my keys, the wind tugging at my jacket, wondering if I'd made a mistake. It's impossible for me to tell the story now without sounding unhinged. Even I didn't believe in ghosts. Not really, not until they started making themselves known. At first, it was only small things. Drafts in rooms where the windows were shut, odd creaks in the walls, a flicker of lights when the breaker clicked. But it's an old house, I thought. The floors aren't level, the pipes groan. I told myself all the things you do to explain away the unknown. I remember it started on my 3rd night. I'd fallen asleep on the couch with a book, half listening to something stupid on TV. That's when I heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs. Not gentle settling, but actual steps. Heel to toe, crossing the bedroom, the way my mother used to tiptoe around my childhood home when she thought everyone was asleep. I lay there, not breathing. The front door was locked. I'd only been in the house for 72 hours. Still, I crept up and checked. Nothing. I decided it had to be the house. I went back to sleep, but the footsteps never felt like the house. The next day felt heavy. I barely ate, barely got out of bed. The sensation of being watched clung to me, like a cold shadow at the edge of my vision. The house smelled faintly of damp wood, and something sweeter, sour almost, barely there but ever present. I convinced myself it was nothing. Old houses have smells. A few days later, I found footprints in the dust up in the attic. I'd never been up there. They were too small to be mine, and too perfectly formed barefoot, toes spread as if balancing. Some were clustered near a small window that was boarded up, almost as if someone had been looking out. I stared too long, and the hairs on my neck prickled. I closed the attic door quickly, locking it out of sight. I tried not to think about it. I worked overtime, came home late, let the kitchen get messy. Then things escalated. Every night, right as the clock ticked past 2:00 a.m., the heat would suddenly shut off, and I'd wake up, shivering. I'd swear I heard humming soft, like a lullaby. It was never loud, just a murmur I could almost ignore, except it settled deep in my chest. I ignored it as best as you can, ignore a feeling that creeps into your bones. Once, after a long shift, I came in late and found every cupboard in the kitchen wide open. My keys, which I always left by the door, were lined up on the windowsill. Flickering in the dark was the microwave timer, running by itself. I stood frozen, heart pounding, silence thick around me. I yelled, but the house swallowed the sound. I texted a friend, "Do you think my house is haunted, lol?" She replied with a ghost emoji, "And maybe get some sage?" I laughed, but when I tried to open the back door for fresh air, it was stuck. Something metallic clattered in the basement. I couldn't sleep that night. I started reading about the place. It turns out someone had died there. A little girl. Sometime in the early 80s. Google only gave me scraps and unofficial mention in a forum, a police archive that said unattended death, no foul play suspected. Her name was Melanie. The more I learned, the stranger the house felt. I'd see things out of the corner of my eye movement in the hallway, a pale hand at the edge of a doorframe. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I caught a reflection behind me in the mirror just for a second, just enough to throw my heart into my throat. It was a girl in a nightgown, blotchy-skinned, with her mouth slightly open, as if she wanted to speak. I whirled around, And of course, there was nothing. I started sleeping with the lights on, music on low. I rehearsed saying, "Leave me alone," to the air, as if that would help. Later that month, my sister came to visit. She didn't last an hour, claimed the house was wrong, that the air was too heavy, that she kept hearing a baby crying from an empty room. I invited her to stay for dinner, hoping company would help me feel better, but she ate little eyes, darting nervously. When she left, she wasn't polite. "Get out," she said. "This house needs to be burned down." The next week, I started packing cardboard boxes, stacked and ready for when I gave up. I'd been too embarrassed to mention most things to anyone. I was packing up my winter coats in the upstairs hall closet when I saw something scrawled on the inside wall. It had been hidden behind a loose panel. It was a name, Melanie, written in childish, shaky pencil. Next to it was, "Help me." That night, I dreamt I was lying in my bed, unable to move. In the hallway, a girl's shadow moved back and forth, humming that same lullaby, soft, slow, out of tune. I woke up with scratches on my forearm, 4 thin red lines, parallel. The next few nights grew darker, longer. I kept waking at exactly 2:13 a.m., the same time, again and again. I'd lie frozen, watching shadows coalesce into shapes just beyond vision. One night, I swore the faint outline of a little girl sat on the edge of my bed, rocking silently, humming that nursery song. I blinked, and she was gone. Days blurred into weeks. The house settled deeper into me like a second skin, not comforting, but oppressive. I started photographing the footprints in the attic, the scratches on the bedroom window frame, the old yellowed handkerchief I found pinned beneath floorboards. Each piece seemed to whisper of a story I wanted to understand but couldn't yet grasp. I reached out to a local historian, Mrs. Croft, an elderly woman who knew every curious detail of Hamilton's forgotten corners. She told me about Melanie, a girl with a sweet smile who died tragically in the house. No one ever spoke much, but the story lingered in townsfolk whispers. Kids who played too close to the house sometimes came back pale and whispered strange things. At Mrs. Croft's urging, I found a local librarian who uncovered old newspapers showing the death was ruled accidental but unexplained. Melanie's parents moved away soon after, but neighbors said they heard singing from the house well into the night for years afterward. The more I learned, the weight of the house felt heavier, like a breath held tight inside the walls. One afternoon, while cleaning, I noticed the attic door, long thought sealed ajar. The hinges groaned. For the first time, an icy fear bloomed. What if the attic wasn't empty? With trembling hands, I pushed it open. Dust motes danced in sunlight. Inside, childhood relics lay scattered: a rusted tricycle, a cracked porcelain doll missing an eye, a faded dress hanging limp on a hook. The air smelled of old paper and something more sorrowful, like forgotten dreams. That night, the house awoke. Whispers turned to cries. The lullaby grew louder, persistent, filling every corner. The windows rattled. Shadows danced on the walls. I lay awake, heart pounding, until a faint scratching came on the bedroom door. I didn't want to open it, but I did. Nothing was there, but the scratches scrawled on the wood weren't mine. Stay. I left the door open, but sleep refused me. Slowly, I began to understand. The house held its sorrow in cycles, repeating, forever. Melanie's story wasn't just whispered in the past, it was living, breathing, in endless now. I tried rituals, burning sage, sprinkling salt, but the house resisted each attempt. The shadows didn't shrink, they grew bolder. My phone died one afternoon. The power flickered endlessly. My journal showed entries in shaky handwriting I didn't remember writing. Words pleading, "Please help me." Sometimes, I woke to cold breath on my neck, footsteps pacing at the ceiling. Finally, there was a night I realized I wasn't alone. I woke gasping. Standing in the corner was the little girl, eyes large and mournful, holding a tattered teddy bear. She whispered, "I'm sorry," and then she vanished. I packed the next day, promise in my heart to never come back. Now, years later, I still hear the lullaby in rainstorms, faint and broken. I wonder if Melanie is still waiting for help she'll never get, and if the house waits for someone else. The house on Glover Street is waiting, and whatever haunts it isn't done. If you ever find yourself on Glover Street in Hamilton, it's the greenish house with the sagging porch. I don't know what happened to Melody or what she wanted, but I do know that whatever is haunting that place is not ready to let anyone rest. Story 2. The Sleepbound Orphanage. The first frost-dusted Gransfield in bedsheet white, settling like a cold shroud into the cracks of boarded windows and crumbling chimneys. The village children watched silently as snow gathered atop the wrought iron gates of Marrow's End, the orphanage on the hill, a crooked, three-story building ceaselessly battered by winds blowing straight off the moors. The place had stood there longer than anyone alive could remember, its dark brickwork mottled and weary, its windows staring like hollow eyes over the village below. Inside Marrow's End, the air was always thick with the hum and hush of the wind threading through empty hallways and drafty rooms, as if searching for something it had lost, or was waiting for something to return. The old timbers creaked, and the floorboards groaned, but the children said the building itself was listening to their every breath. They said the matron never slept. They said the clocks in Marrow's End did not keep time the way clocks in the rest of the world did not exactly. Penny was the last arrival before the snows closed the road for winter. Her parents were swallowed by the river one frozen night. Driving back from her grandmother's house, their coach lost beneath a frostbitten bridge. Penny remembered only shards, darkness, the flash of broken glass, her mother's trembling hands fumbling desperately at the latch before everything slipped away. She later woke on a doorstep, cold, frightened, alone, the heavy doors of Marrow's End sliding shut behind her. The matron, Miss Fenn, was a tall, pale woman with shoulders as sharp as headstones and a voice like worn velvet, cold but soft enough to soothe or scare. Her smile was practiced, like a shadow stretched too thin. When she first held Penny's chin gently in her pale hand, she whispered, "We all find rest in time. You will too." Penny soon fell into the slow, grinding rhythm of Marrow's End, waking before the sun with a rattle of shutters, lining up for chores. In a kitchen so grim, its walls seemed to suck the warmth from the air. Attending lessons held in a cold, stony room where voices seemed to echo without meaning, and supping thin soup at long tables where silence sat heavily between the children. At night, dozens of small bodies climbed into iron beds that creaked beneath threadbare blankets, listening to the building settle in the growing darkness. As sleep overtook them, a strange expectancy leaked through the orphanage walls, as if the very stones held their breath, waiting for something to happen that no one dared name. No one spoke of the attic door. It was nailed shut at the farthest end of the third floor, chained and guarded by a black, warped grandfather clock that never chimed. Not even when the wind howled like a mournful ghost. Not even when a child vanished in the dark. Penny once asked about the deep scratches etched into the attic's doorframe. Lines and circles shaped like broken chains. Tiny symbols like warnings, but the older children shushed her with scared eyes and hushed warnings. Don't listen to the music. Keep your eyes shut if you wake in the night. By her third week, Penny feared she understood, for as she drifted towards sleep, a low, shivering tune began to thread through the radiator pipes beneath her bed, thin as dust, trembling with grief, echoing faint singing she could almost hear, but never truly grasp. She pressed her pillow harder against her ears, but the music slipped into her thoughts like a cold draft creeping beneath blankets. Winter thickened its grip. Frost bit deeper into window panes, and days blurred like ghostly gray parchment, blank, silent, endless, and children vanished with increasing regularity. One morning, Tom's bed was cold and bare, his few tattered books stacked neatly on the nightstand. The next day, Jenny's shoes sat alone by the hearth, her breakfast untouched on the table. "She's sleeping longer now," the matron said once, her voice cold and echoing through the silence. "We mustn't disturb." But no one ever returned to the dormitory. Penny watched as the rows of small beds grew shorter, disappearing one by one, as if the walls themselves absorbed their warm memories, stealing their names, their voices. One night, when the house seemed impossibly cold, Penny woke suddenly gasping, paralyzed with fear. The music had grown bolder, sweet, broken, humming lullabies with lyrics she almost remembered from long ago. She could not move or scream, Shadows spilled like spilled ink from beneath her bed, nodding and climbing toward the ceiling, twining into long, slender fingers that reached and gripped the dark. At the edge of consciousness, Penny's gaze locked upon the attic door, standing wide open as if breathing, weeping a strange, silvery mist that shimmered and dripped into the cold hallway. A pale procession slipped forth on ghostly feet, children faint as frost, eyes closed and mouths slack in everlasting sleep. Their skin was rimed with frost, and each bore a faint sigil, drawn in silver ink. On their wrist a chain, a songbird, a twisting vine glimmering softly as they drifted silently into the attic's open maw. Penny's voice stayed locked inside her throat, but she tried to scream. The music faltered, and the doors slammed shut in sudden silence. No one believed her when she spoke of the sleep-marching children. "Bad dreams," Miss Fenn said firmly, her tone almost cruel. "Sleep is a kindness, Penelope. All children deserve their rest." In the cold days that followed, Penny felt the matron's eyes boring into her every moment. She began to watch and listen closely. Plotting, she saw older orphans slip into sleep while eating thin soup, faces slack and expressionless, hands twitching faintly, as if gripped by secret sorrows and memories. Each had the same shimmering sigil on their wrist, a mark that was gone by morning. Penny learned to fake sleep, keeping her eyes barely open, ears straining to catch the silent threads of danger whispered above a faint rustle, a long sigh, the softest note of that haunting tune. One February night, a storm roared in, trapping Merrow's End beneath snow taller than Penny's waist. Thunder rattled the shutters, and cold crept like a wolf into the house as sleep tangled into every child. Penny clutched a tiny beetle she'd pinched from the pantry and crushed between her fingers in a frantic effort to stay awake. Sharp pain grounding her as the music began again, louder, stronger. The pipes shook violently. The attic door, backlit by icy moonlight, unlatched itself with a slow, sorrowful sigh. Something slithered down the stairs, a shape broader and thinner than any woman, woven of mist and whispers. It glided, crowned, with tangled hair studded with broken keys and feathers, humming that unbearable melody as it came. Penny's jaw clenched. Her pulse thumped loud in her ears. The song creature's voice was a cold rasp in her mind. "You are near the tipping. You are almost ready for sleep." Mustering all the courage she could scrape, Penny forced herself upright and followed the shadowy figure with knife-edged fear. It floated up the narrow back staircase, past the grandfather clock frozen forever at midnight, and into the attic's black, hungry mouth. Driven by dread, Penny crept after. The wood cracked sharply beneath her boots. The attic was vast, a cavern swallowing light, its walls lost in shadow. Its ceiling crawled with frost that glittered like broken glass. In the center hovered a circle of children, faces slack, eyes closed, levitating silently inches from splintered floorboards like dolls hung by invisible strings. In their midst floated Miss Fenn, not standing, but suspended, her eyes empty as a void, mouth unhinged in a terrible smile, thin arms weaving commands in a silent dance. The mist creature curled around her, crooning softly, as Penny's gaze was drawn to an ancient music box resting on the floor, warped relic wound endlessly by dozens of small, ghostly hands. As the music swelled, Penny felt her mind drowsing, the lullaby burrowing into her thoughts like roots into stone. Shadows stretched from the floor, threading like black veins through each child's chest, converging on Miss Fenn's heart. "We must keep dreaming," the matron intoned, voice a fractured echo. "Dream forever. Feed forever." Summoning a courage she thought lost, Penny broke the circle, reaching into the swirl of sleepwalkers, waving her arms, screaming wordlessly. The music stabbed her mind, fingernails raking through the fog. The children spasmed and collapsed with cries, bodies thudding on the splintered wood. Miss Fenn shrieked. The sound was beyond noise, a tearing, shattering scream that cracked the attic dust and shook the mist creature. Loose it reeled wild, losing form and falling. With a desperate motion, Penny seized the music box and hurled it through the frost-choked window. Branches shattered and icicles tumbled as the spell unraveled with a terrible howl. The attic trembled, shadows convulsed, then shattered. The children woke with sobs, clutching one another, confusion roiling in their eyes. Penny faced Miss Fenn's fading form, their eyes locked, one shining bright with terror and rage, the other empty and endless. The dark shadows surged, then shattered like broken glass. Miss Fenn fell, crumbling into dust before her body struck the floor with a soft sigh. Penny led the dazed orphans down the staircase, passing the still grandfather clock, a monument to endless waiting into halls, flooding with the fragile light of dawn. The storm had retreated, and Marrow's End felt empty and lighter than it had in years. Weeks later, officials ruled the orphanage unfit. The missing children, the strange vanishings, the unanswered questions too many. The iron gates were chained, the windows boarded, the building left to rot in silence. The children scattered into foster homes and distant relatives. Penny was one of the few who survived the ordeal intact, though forever bent by the memories of what she escaped. But on cold winter nights, when wind rattles the windows of her new home and ancient pipes hum deep beneath the floor, Penny still hears that music, soft, insistent, promising a sleep without end. She traces a faint, invisible sigil on her wrist and whispers to the darkness, "I am awake. I am awake." Still, somewhere behind boarded windows and broken locks, Marrow's End waits, and the music box winds itself once more, searching in the gathering snow for new dreamers, to sleep forever, to keep the song alive beneath the frostbitten sky. Story 3. The Lighthouse Keeper's Vigil. Elliot accepted the position of lighthouse keeper at Crow's Point with a mixture of relief and anxiety. After the chaos of city life and a failed marriage, solitude seemed a blessing, an opportunity to recalibrate, to face only the sea and the clouds. The island awaited, battered by ceaseless waves, ringed by jagged rocks, its lighthouse a skeletal finger thrust into the fog. The journey began with the trembling ferry that crossed into graying waters. The mainland receded quickly, and clouds thickened, blurring the horizon into an endless gray. On the dock, weathered villagers met Elliot with tight nods and averted eyes. An old woman lingered as he gathered his bags, her thin voice trailing after him through salt-sprayed air. "Keep the light burning. If you see shadows on the water, look away." He laughed it off, attributing her words to salt, age, and island superstition. Inside, the lighthouse was cramped, suffused with the smell of salt and thyme. Elliot's living quarters nestled beneath the iron spiral stairs, which creaked and groaned as though remembering every footfall since the place was built. His belongings took up little space, but the weight of the sea's presence settled heavy in every corner. His days began and ended with the beacon of flame burning atop the tower, swept by the ancient Fresnel lens that cast gold arcs through the endless mist. By daylight, the craggy rocks below glittered wet and sharp. Seagulls wheeled and cried. But once darkness fell, the sea became a shifting abyss, and the lighthouse his sole anchor. On his first night, Elliot perched on the grated balcony, listening to the unseen tide. Moonlight filtered in watery bands, flickering across aged stones. The silence wasn't empty. It was watchful, as if the rocks and waves themselves waited for something to stir. At the edge of sleep, he heard faint melodies, distant, inhuman, half drowned by the wind. In the following days, Elliot fell into the rhythms of isolation. He refueled the lamp, oiled creaky hinges, and logged the incomprehensible patterns of clouds and tides. Radio contact with the mainland was sporadic. The radio emitted bursts of static as frequently as connection. Over time, he began to sense patterns in the hiss and crackle fragments of a broken code, the island trying to speak. Then the strange things began. Some nights, dim shapes flickered on the cliffs far below, figures, shaped neither quite like men nor seals, but something in between, draped in seaweed and foam. Elliot dismissed them as tricks of fog, yet the images seeped into his dreams. A woman with coral-like eyes, hair writhing and curling like brine, beckoning silently from watery depths. Her mouth moved, but Elliot awoke before hearing words. One rain-soaked evening, while scrubbing grime from the lantern room, Elliot's boot struck a loose floorboard. Curious, he pried it open, discovering beneath a brittle oilskin bundle an ancient journal. The cramped, desperate handwriting belonged to Martin Shale, keeper long vanished. One entry caught his eye. The sea is hungrier than the land. It demands witness and blood. To leave the beacon unlit invites things that never left the tide. Elliot scoffed. But beneath his bravado, doubt took root. The journal chronicled a slow unraveling. Voices beneath the waves, unmarked, lights far from any ship, otter-like creatures with faces nearly human and eyes as black as the deep. The final pages were frantic. She returns tonight. If I falter, I am hers. That night, a storm unlike any before howled through the tower. The gale tore at the glass panes, and the beacon's flame danced, maddened by the fierce wind. Elliot crouched by the lens, staring into the black horizon. Thunder flashed, revealing for a brief, terrible moment a procession of ghostly figures threading the rocks, pale, elongated, bearing lanterns dripping seawater. Suddenly, the beacon flickered and died. A suffocating cold pressed in as heavy as iron chains. Elliot's limbs felt bound by invisible shackles. From the foot of the spiral stairs rose a sound, a trickle that swelled to a chorus. Dozens of voices weaving anguish and longing. They rose, cascading against the rough stone, dragging with them the stench of rot and salt. Unseen hands pressed his shoulders, fingers cold as eel skin brushed his cheek. From the darkness emerged a shape half woman, half tide. Her eyes fathomless voids where light disappeared. Her mouth opened, and Elliot heard, clear and commanding, "Keep the light. Bear witness." Struggling as if underwater, Elliot grasped the lamp, striking match after match. Blood filled his mouth, but the flame caught. Slowly, the oppressive chill withdrew like a receding tide. Below, the pale figures disappeared into churning waves. The message was clear. The bargain was renewed for one more night. In the days following, Elliot changed. The fog thickened, swallowing the island in damp whiteness. Time blurred. He found seawater, pooled on the stairs, strands of seaweed and long hairs twisted by the windowsill, and pockets of brine in unlikely corners of the keep. His reflection became unsteady in the lantern glass. Sometimes her face overlaid his, lips moving silently, eyes pleading or filled with malice. His log entries grew fragmented, questions written for no one. What binds her here? Why me? Can I break the chain? One morning, Elliot awoke to find the journal flipped to a page he'd never seen before. No one leaves. To abandon the light is to join them. I have seen myself, standing on the rocks, and I do not wish to know what I am. Determined to break free, Elliot spent the day packing. Shadows gathered now even in weak daylight, shifting with the mist. On the shore, he built a fire of driftwood, sending smoke signals toward the mainland, but the horizon hung bleak and empty. That night, he did not light the beacon. Before dusk settled, the singing rose anew. Stones throbbed beneath his feet. The tide dragged itself higher than memory. Shapes pressed against every window, robed in foam and moonlight, clawing, begging, promising release. Within the darkened chamber atop the tower, the mermaid sea witch appeared. Her form shifted, waterlogged and beautiful, monstrous and lost. She whispered, "You see me now." Her hands reached for his chest. "You belong here, as I do, as all broken hearts do." Screaming joined the rising chorus. Cold spread, weightless, pulling him through the stone floor, into the roiling foundations, down, deep beneath rock and reef. He glimpsed the faces of those who had failed before. Pressed in sand, voices entwined in coral and kelp. Weeks later, rescuers found the lighthouse deserted. The lamp was cold, the room chilled to bone. Scratch marks etched into the stone beside the stairs read, "The sea keeps what it's owed." Elliot's logbook lay open by the lantern, pages damp and covered in seaweed. Since then, villagers swear the lighthouse never truly dims. On storm-tossed nights, flashes dance signals or pleas from within its glass-crowned tower, though no keeper remains. Fishermen steer clear from those waters as the wind carries, to those willing to listen, fragments of an ancient, mournful song. Keep the light burning. If you see shadows on the water, look away. You've been listening to Scary Sleep Stories. May your dreams be calm and your night undisturbed.